Trust in God forever. For in God we have an everlasting rock. So declared the great prophet Isaiah in the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, many of us today might immediately react to that passage by questioning the object of Isaiah's devotion. Trust in God, he tells us. Well, God is kind of a slippery concept. God is an idea that has been used and abused so much that it has been proven to be the cause of just as much conflict as comfort. We modern Unitarian Universalists embrace many different expressions and experiences of what the holy might be. We are blessed in this congregation to have no consensus about this idea of God, and we are encouraged to respectfully and authentically listen and learn from one another's experiences of it. This diversity is what keeps our community and our approach to religion so alive. Several years ago, on the Sunday right after Thanksgiving, we had a special interactive service here at All Peoples. Some of you may remember it. Everyone in our sanctuary was given a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. And then I asked you all to compose a short prayer of gratitude to the holy. And then we all shared our prayers aloud with one another at the end of the service. Now, the prescribed format for creating these prayers was a simple fill in the blank, allowing you to name the holy for yourself, and then list whatever you felt most thankful for. In preparing for this service, I wanted to make sure that it was going to be an experience that would feel not exclusively theistic in any way, that it would feel inclusive as possible, so that everybody could participate. So in introducing this exercise, I decided I really needed to come up with some way to encourage you to let go of all those preconceived definitions and notions that we have been taught about the holy, and to engage however felt most true and right for you. One way of doing this was to invite you to imagine this idea of God, not as an external force of spirit or nature, but simply as whatever it is that you call on in your times of deepest need. Whatever it is you trust most about life. Now, as expected, when it came time in that service to hear these prayers that you had composed read aloud, there came forth this beautiful and inspiring litany of ways of expressing and naming what is holy to us. Trust in God forever, says Isaiah. Well, if God is a slippery concept and a confounding idea for many of us, I would suggest to you today that trust may be an even more slippery concept. And trust, perhaps for us, may even be more important and a little more challenging. In what do we trust? In what can we trust? These are foundational questions for our living and form the center of our spirituality. I was reading this week that Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is not the only judge on our nation's highest court to be facing major allegations of wrongdoing. Others, including Chief Justice John Roberts, have been implicated in accepting unreported gifts from donors who have vested interests in ongoing cases before the High Court. This, and I hope of very questionable recent decisions from our Supreme Court, well, they make me not so sure I can trust in their impartiality and their willingness to uphold our Constitution. Not sure I can trust our courts. A good friend of mine who lives down in Texas was telling me recently that he had just opened up a new checking account at Wells Fargo Bank. Now, I told him that I'm not sure I would have chosen to do that. I mean, I remember back in 2016 when that crazy scandal with Wells Fargo, do you remember that? It was revealed that bank workers had opened millions of unauthorized accounts in customers' names without their consent. Now, Wells Fargo paid over $2 billion in fines and settlements over this, but I'm not so sure that I want to put my money with them. This past week, CNN reported that a recent survey here in Kentucky found that 48% of voters say that they highly approve of the job our current president is doing. This despite the war, the economy, the gas prices, the corruption, the racism, the endless lies. Makes you wonder about these folks, doesn't it? What are they thinking? Makes me wonder sometimes about the common sense and the basic morality of a lot of folks that I have to live around. For many of us, the idea of trusting in societal institutions and structures of authority to protect us and to have our best interests at heart has long been a dubious prospect. An awareness of the racism, sexism, and systematic oppression that is baked into our culture and its instruments of power makes us leery and mindful to be on guard rather than openly embrace these things as helpful or supportive. Whether it's the Epstein files, the theft and financial fraud, the embrace of division and authoritarianism, everywhere we look these days, the institutions and leaders, and too many of our fellow Americans too, the people with whom we are to put our trust, seem to have betrayed that trust. And yet, we must trust in something. Navigating each and every day requires some level of confidence that something will be as we expect and as we need. Now, most traditional Western religions, like Islam and Judaism and Christianity, teach that the place to put your trust is ultimately in God, because God does not change, they say. But the thing is, even if God doesn't change, our understandings and our experiences of God often change and evolve. And so that makes God a moving target, so to speak. And thus such belief requires more faith and submission than we may be willing to give. For religious humanists like me, my faith is grounded in a trust in the potential of the human spirit, a belief in our individual and collective capacity to do the right thing, to choose the better path, to act with wisdom and not simply out of fear. But of course, having faith in people, well, that's a slippery business, right? Because people are never perfect. People make horrific mistakes. And occasionally, if not infrequently, they let us down. If Erik Erikson's research into the stages of psychological development way back in the 1950s, in his research, he observed that as very young infants, we learn to trust based on whether we can rely on the sameness, on the continuity of the care and the attention that we receive. Erikson plotted how this development of trust in our earliest pre-verbal years directly affects our ability to have successful adult relationships and our ability to trust in anything as grown-ups. We need sameness. We need continuity in order to have faith in others. But life is not predictable. Life is not guaranteed. People can be very inconsistent, and things are always changing. Everything is always changing. So trusting, no matter how our early childhood years may have unfolded, is a challenge for each of us. I recently read some interesting thoughts about trust from a Buddhist teacher named Philip Moffat. One of Moffat's students asked him about how our need for trust reconciles with the Buddha's ideas of non-attachment. Moffat pointed out that there are at least two different kinds of trust. There's transactional trust and innate trust. Transactional trust is trust which is contingent on outcomes, actions, and promise-keeping. It is a necessary foundation for our living. Moffat writes this: imagine that life at its core is a web formed of trust that we each rely on for support. Each of us creates new strands of trust from the web throughout the day. When we fail to do so, the web that supports us all weakens. Viewed in this way, transactional trust itself becomes a spiritual practice, one of building character through intention and discipline, which refines our very being while joining us with others. However, the web of trust is delicate and easily torn. When this happens in a business or a personal relationship, a community or a country, transactional trust is replaced by adversarial advantage-taking, dog-eat-dog mentality, only the fittest survive mindset. When trust falls into shadow, we lose our ability to live with generosity and with compassion. Now, Moffat says that the Buddha's teachings speak of a greater trust beyond the transactional. Buddha taught of an innate trust. Innate trust is the belief that if we live each day with the intention to act on our core values, even in difficult circumstances, our lives and all life will be enriched. This does not mean that we trust our loved ones to never hurt us. It just means we trust that loving them is going to be worth it. He explains innate trust is not based on a transactional outcome. It is simply trusting that however the relationship unfolds, your vulnerability to the other is always a worthy act. The occasional disappointment is the cost of having a healthy sense of trust. I think Moffat is basically saying that we must trust in life, that we must trust in the power of trust itself. I have come to see this type of trust as being more essential than ever in navigating the harsh realities of life these days. Being able to remain optimistic and steadfast in my faith in humanity and in the interdependence we have with one another means that I have to be strong enough to endure the bad things that we do to each other, to live through the selfishness and ignorance, the cruelty, the broken commitments, and the disappointments, and still have trust. Some years ago, Peter Morales, a former president of our Unitarian Universalist Association, wrote the following for an essay in our UU World magazine. Morales wrote, "It is easier to love another person than it is to trust that person. Love is the center of our faith as Unitarian Universalists. Our capacity to act for justice and with kindness comes from our ability to feel compassion. Love is wonderful, but love that is only a feeling of compassion is never enough. That emotion is only the beginning. Love has to grow. Love has to act. To create deep and enduring relationships in a family or a congregation or a religious movement. our love must develop into mutual trust. I think what Peter Morales was talking about is that innate trust. That innate trust that the Buddha promoted. And perhaps that is not that different from the trust that the prophet Isaiah was actually speaking about. Such trust may seem naive and even dangerous at times. It may feel impossible at others, or at least unwise. There is no doubt that such trust will expose us to harm, to disappointment. It will leave us changed. But perhaps living in isolation and in fear of others, building walls of separation, both physical or emotional, because we cannot risk and we cannot trust, is even more dangerous and unwise. Becoming our best selves and living into the sacred connections that we share means that we must find the courage to come together. We must learn to trust each other, regardless of the consequences. Walking in faith with love and with hope is never easy, and it is never safe. But ultimately, it is the only way. In our opening hymn this morning, we sang that we are a church that reveres the past, but trusts the dawning future more. Those beautiful and aspirational words that were written not quite a century ago, but quite a while back, they are a calling. And I got to tell you that sometimes I'm not always up for that calling. They require a lot of trust. On a Thursday morning when I see the latest news from the Strait of Hormuz, or I hear about another mass shooting, or I just run into unhoused folks in my neighborhood who are struggling, I wonder about that trust. But then I get to come here to church, and I get to be with all of you. And I am encouraged once more to be confident, to be hopeful in our shared capacity to find our way together. So let us continue to be people who trust in ourselves amid all our misgivings and our mistakes, who trust in others even when they fail us, who trust in life with all of its sorrow and its joys, who trust in that innate trust, who trust that it will guide us each step of our way. So may it be. And amen.